Hi, everybody. Welcome. Thanks for coming. Um, just kind of a quick show of hands. I see some faces that I know and some that I don't. Who in the crowd is an Eclipse committer, contributor, part of a working group? Oh, wow. Okay, so good. Thank you all for coming. We have some exciting news to share with you today, and so I'd like to get started and hope you find this as exciting as I know I do. So for those who don't know me, actually, before we go on, I'm Sharon, and I manage the Eclipse IP Management team at the Eclipse Foundation. And many of you have dealt with me over past several years. Let's just go into some of the areas we're just going to quickly cover. So just a little bit of background for those who aren't involved yet. Let you know kind of the issue statement that we're trying to address for the community, some objectives of what we're doing and the benefits, little talk about the license compliance model, which we're going to switch to. We're going to be offering a self-service tool to the projects, and I'll show you a little sketch on what that's going to look like, along with the process overview of what we anticipate that's going to be an experience for you. A little bit about our futures that are coming up. There's going to be several changes we're going to be continuing to make after our first push. And some just general practices around intellectual property, if you're a committer, and a little bit about the open source compliance movement that's currently has been underway for several years, and we're trying to catch up, and a little bit about that, and then just wrap up. If there's any time for questions, we can have a couple of questions. And I should say that if there are questions after, both Wayne Beaton and myself are around for the next day and a bit, so do feel free to touch base with us. So just some background. The way we implement our processes at the Eclipse Foundation is based on a board-approved Eclipse IP policy. So we have to take that policy, which defines how we actually implement a due diligence process around the IP management for Eclipse projects. The first thing we actually do, and any of you who are already involved know that we have formal legal agreements. You have to agree to a DCO if you're contributing. If you're a committer, you have to enter into an individual agreement with us, or your employer is a member and they have entered into a committer agreement with us. And if you're involved in the working groups, again, your employer, your member has to be involved at that level. And the reason for these formal agreements is so that we know that we have the necessary IP flows in order to take your contributions in and then be able to redistribute them back out under the project license. So for those, again, who are familiar, our due diligence review process involves quite a lengthy system process, if you will. From the time it starts, we resolve provenance of the code that's being contributed. We check it for license compatibility, and then we actually scan it for anomalies. So what we're looking for there is, is there any code copied in here that shouldn't be, or it hasn't been declared? How do we resolve it? Does it require some housekeeping? Is it something a little bit more serious, and so on? The way the community interacts with us on that is by entering an IP ticket, but we refer to them as contribution questionnaires. So you'll see me throughout this presentation refer to a CQ. And it's just asking the IP team to engage on a IP request. And why do we do all of this? It's for basically to give confidence to commercial entities that they can take the code base from the Eclipse projects and use them in their offerings, and they have a level of safe confidence that there's not going to be any problems with it. It's a high bar that's set. It is a rigorous process, and the output of that is it's very well respected. So thank all of you for joining us on that journey who's been involved to date. So what is the real issue here? The policy and procedure dates back to 2004, and we have made some significant changes over time. I think 3 years ago, we did offer a license compliance model to any project who was starting with us in order to get you up and running faster. We would do license checks only on your third-party dependencies, but a lot of the seasoned, experienced projects with us wanted the full due diligence review. So we've been offering slight changes, but we now know that we need to go further. We can't support agile development. We can't keep up with the technology landscape of today. And it's burdensome for you, and we really are lacking some automation on this side. So I would like to just point out, I think the last Node.JS request we received had over 4,000 different third-party libraries involved in it. It's really difficult to scale to that. It didn't. I don't know. Hang on, let me look out here. So the time's arrived, and it's time to bring this process in line with contemporary expectations, right? Like 4,000 libraries, we cannot do a full deep dive on that for anybody. There's just no way to scale. So we sat down and we figured out that we had to, the Eclipse Management Organization decided we had to redefine our IP governance approach. So we sat, we've planned a lot, and we decided that we had a plan that we could take forward. In order to do so, we needed to update the IP policy and make certain changes to it. Mostly that was around some definition, streamlining, changing how we refer to Eclipse content versus non-Eclipse content. I think it's much straightforward if we focus on project content, which is typically what the projects are developing. And then third-party content is what the projects are leveraging but not maintaining or packaging, potentially. And then official release and distributed content. That was probably one of the bigger changes. So we're not going to focus for going forward on, Git commits. We understand there might be some indeterminate states happening, but we're going to focus on IP clearance fully at a distribution release level. When we had our changes in order, we had to approach the IP Advisory Committee to have their review to make sure we were in line with, keeping everything focused on risk mitigation and not losing that brand that we have and the care that we take. And we're very lucky to let you know that the board approved the changes at their board meeting on Monday. So we're ready to roll. So the objective we have in front of us is to now focus on a license compliance model only for third-party content. So those of you who are familiar, you know that we've been doing the full deep dives, but now we want to reduce that burden, lower the barrier, but we need to keep a high bar, shift our focus then when we have extra time on other areas that we feel have high value. And one of the bigger things that we're going to start to do is trust other sources of information. So not just our license information, not just our curated license data, but other areas in the open source community who are actually doing that curation as well and harvesting. And then throughout all of this, we are going to stay risk focused. Risk mitigation is the goal. Remain being well respected, and being a leader in this will continue to be the objective. So ideally, here's what this means for the projects. We're going to remove the gate where you're waiting on us to let you know if your packages that you're requiring have been approved. It's going to increase your project velocity. So you will be able to have some flexibility and predictability and know that you can kind of get up and running without waiting on us so long. And in cases, it can be sometimes weeks, if not months, for final approval on a package. We're going to reduce the administrative, and I think this will be the biggest kind of, I hope, celebration for you, for the community. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. Parallel IP is going to become just the standard. No longer do mature projects have to wait. They are not entitled to parallel IP because they're at a mature level. The expectation would be that they're very IP clean, so they can't take something in that may not have been fully vetted. We're going to change that. That will be the standard for everybody. And then new projects can actually bring their history to Eclipse when they come. I don't know if anybody recently came to Eclipse with their project and found out that they couldn't bring any of the history with them. And rightfully so, we understand why that was upsetting, and perhaps not fully accepted wholeheartedly, although most people have agreed, but it has been a pain point. And it's interesting to note that one of the things that we do when we're looking into an IP review is we actually go and we're looking for the history of other projects. So kind of removing it and not allowing it to come was really hard for some people. So they are going to bring it, but we won't be performing a review on it because it's going to be not part of the official release. The official release will start with what we vet when they provide it to us. So we are going to remove the stigma of type AB. This was part of what we rolled out a few years ago. Type A project, the intent was it would be a type A release where you had third-party dependencies that had been vetted at the license compliance level only. And that's perfectly fine. That's how we get projects up and running, and we were perfectly fine with projects doing releases like this. And then at some point, we would actually start to do the deep dives for those projects so that they could go to type B. Well, scale and time didn't allow that to happen. So we are actually going to allow projects to adopt this approach during their development cycle. This is the big change here. And then before a formal release, you're going to check in with the IP team for your final IP clearance. This will allow us to do provide more training to the projects and more education, and allow us to engage with the broader community who's doing a lot of this license curation. So, yes?
Are you taking questions now or at the end?
How's my time? I'm okay?
How does the third item there,
Mhm.
does it conflict with the recently introduced changes in the process where you are allowed to do releases on your own if you had a formal review no more than 12 months ago?
Yeah, so let's not confuse those two matters at this particular point. I'll talk a little bit more about this as we go and what official release means. I think that still applies based on the development process as it exists today. But I think for the purpose of this, don't get hung up on that point. We can talk about something like that a little bit later on. Okay. Sorry, I didn't answer your question, but we'll talk.
I almost said I'm used to it.
Hey, so a license compliance model. So here's the big news. Eclipse Foundation will stop performing deep copyright provenance reviews of third-party content. We are not going to apply the same methodology that we have been doing to date to it. We are going to focus on license compatibility being the standard, which is what we are we have found out is typically the industry standard. And we will be working with the projects to allow you to start this process on your own. You will be given a tool, and it will work on your build, and it will identify if you have any IP violations. And if you do, you will work with us, but we're going to trust our data, other people's data, to help the project's release and enable you guys to do all of this during your development iterations. So we're going to give you a tool, we're going to provide a process around it, and we are going to work together to make these changes so that we are still maintaining a really high level of IP management. So I want you to keep in mind that this change in process only applies to third-party content. So if you have a reason to modify a third-party package, and which effectively turns it into a fork, that at that point becomes project code, and so the entire due diligence review process will apply to that. This is only third-party content that you're leveraging, not modifying. So the new model, and those who are familiar will know that this is supposed to work if I press it, but I don't see it. Here we go. Protic Content, so the regular provenance, license compatibility, scanning for anomalies will continue. This is the high bar. We will continue to maintain this. Third-party content that's not being modified, going to do a license compatibility verification on it. So this is what we are anticipating that the tooling we have, this is kind of how the process will work. So let's just see if I can do this. So you are using, I'd like to say 4 packages, but I'm pretty much sure most Eclipse projects are leveraging a lot more than 4 third-party packages. So we'll use this tool. There's a license service. It's going to be a tool that we will be providing. And it will essentially know what can be compatible and move through the system, and then what can't. So these are licenses that will be on the approved whitelist for the community. And then D, maybe D, the question mark is there's no license, it's no assertion, it's an incompatible license. So at that point, that is when you would be engaging with the Eclipse IP team. And you wouldn't be engaging with all your 400 packages. You're engaging on this one that is of an issue. It has a violation or a false positive, perhaps. The idea then would be that the IP team would engage on that particular package request in order to resolve the matter. Hopefully it can be resolved. Then, when we do, we feed it back into our whitelist, which then would be an override the next time you run your bill. And the plan is that we will start donating some of our curated data to Clearly Defined. If any of you have heard of Clearly Defined, they're doing, yes, Kai.
Do I still need to open up the CQ manual process that we have today for component D?
For component D, yeah. So right now, I'll talk a little bit about that later. But yeah, so right now we have to the intent is to roll this out prior to year end. And in order to do so, we're going to use the current infrastructure that we have. So yes, you would be opening a CQ, an IP request.
Obviously, in the future, I can see that might be done automatically based on the license.
Again, that's where we're hoping to get to. Yeah, that's our ideal goal, but it's just going to take some time. So I will talk about that later on. Any other questions on this slide for those that are familiar with our process? So the bill of materials that we refer to here is, at this particular juncture, will be the output of the tooling that we're going to provide to you. Yeah, so it'll be the the license identifier, the version, the applicable licensing in SPDX format, and it would. Right now, we're looking at potentially just a straight listing, and then maybe HTML something, and then you would take that. Then at the end of the day, when it's all clear and there's no IP violations, and you would then include that in your release. So that then becomes your bill of materials, right? Something I wanted to say here, I'm after forgetting. Well, so the thing here is, and I think I have a slide on this. The intent is that, or the intent is not that people don't have to understand the packaging and what the compatible licenses are before you get going. The projects are still going to have that onus, right? So if something is GPL, it's not going to pass even if you end up submitting the ticket to us, right? So we will start providing guidance and process and blog posts around this so that we get you guys more familiar with what are the compatible licenses today. Okay, perfect. I'm glad to hear that. So again, this is just a little bit of a kind of a different flavor on it, but the whole idea is that the community, the projects, when you're ready to start your development cycle, you're not waiting on us. You include your content. You run the self-service validation. It will give you a report. It will tell you if everything passed or if there is a violation in a package. And that again is when you would engage with the IP team, where we would work on resolving the issue for you, and then feed it back in again. You run your build again, and then it passes, and then right before your formal release, you come and you say, okay, I'm ready to release. At this point, there really shouldn't be much for us to do. This shouldn't be a gate here, right? Because all along the way, the tooling has already been ran for you. You know if you're in good health or not. And this really should be a check at this point that, yeah, we're just doing a final double check, right? And then you release. So the whole idea is that over here, when you're developing, you're not locked into anything, right? We do it early enough that you're starting that process early enough so that by the time you get to an IP certification, there's no surprises for you, right? The tool's already telling you along the way whether you're good or you're not. You have issues. Yes.
What would be great to see is a kind of timing diagram because we have a real process of simultaneous release.
Mm-hmm.
We have simultaneous release like this, so please declare your release in some time before, and please submit some time before, and so on. So it will be easier to plan for people.
Good.
When
Yeah.
to start the process,
Yeah.
the last day
Yeah.
we can start.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that's actually something that we, unfortunately haven't been able to do before this. And this again is one of the things that we're hoping to get out of this is that we can actually start to be more involved in the project management release cycle for you guys, right? But we just didn't have time. So hopefully this will come together really nice, and this will give us all the ability to do this. So we're doing this to make you guys more successful, and we're going to be working with you in parallel all the way throughout is the idea. By the time you're ready to release, whether that's a week ahead, like no surprise is just easy. It's not something that you have to worry about anymore. So engagement with the IP team. So a CQ request filed only if and when required. And so the requirement would be based on a violation in the tooling report, or if the content you are using contains cryptography. Now, our idea on cryptography is we still need to track which Eclipse projects contain cryptography. And the reason for that is we have requirements regarding export control with the United States industry, services and commercial, biz. Yes, Kai.
Can you elaborate a little on what you mean by it contains cryptography? Because I see several CQs actually had something in that field, and
Mm-hmm.
CQ only makes use of standard Java encryption technology.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, this is an indicator that people do not really know whether their project contains cryptography, and that is worth declaring or not.
So, fair question. I don't know if I have that answer for you right now because up until this time, we're relying on you. Like we're relying on the committers to know whether it does or it doesn't. I think what you're saying is, can there be a clearer definition of what the requirement would be for that? And I see Wayne Beaton taking down notes on the fly so that we can address this issue after. It is something that we haven't defined very well, and I'll admit to that. Yes.
I think if I produce production ready, where it always has cryptography inside, some use of it, because we have to protect everything on outside borders. So yeah, that is not necessarily subject to this
Export control.
that requirement to declare. Yeah. Therefore, it is imperative that people understand what they need to declare if there is something that they need to declare. That is subject
So we will try and address this a little more effectively. Just so you know, because it's open source software, it's a declaration that we're making to them. And we actually we are able to export just because of the classifications that we fall into with them, right? So we have some FAQs on our website, but it doesn't go into enough of the detail that you're asking about. So we will attempt to do better on that. And then again, the project's engaging prior to a formal release for final IP clearance. And again, we anticipate that this will be a very here you go, everything's kind of really good to go, and a kind of stamp. So what, right? Is anyone sitting there going, so what does this really mean, right, to us? Hopefully, it's obvious. You will not be entering 400 CQs anymore, or 500 CQs anymore, or a Node.JS CQ with 4,000 libraries attached to it, packaged up. It will be only if and when required. So again, what does this really mean for me as a project committer? Well, we're anticipating and we're fairly confident that the onus is going to be fairly lightweight. The compliance report will identify any violations if there are any. And just so you know, we're going to ask for your patience while we start to roll this out, right? Because it's going to be a bit of a work in progress as we curate data and make the system smarter. And you're relieved of the responsibility, as I said, to request an IP review for every third-party package requirement because we're going to focus on license compliance. Now, that is not to say that a package may have a compatible license, but we know that we're for a reason that we found, we are going to handle it a little bit differently. And you might get a flag pop up on that for a variety of reasons. Maybe we need to discuss with you kind of special consideration if it has a weak copy left license to make sure it's not being commingled and so on and so forth. So there's a few instances where we will want you to check in with us because we already know some issues that we need to provide guidance to you on. Question? No?
Maybe in that case, would you approach us?
The tool will tell you, right? It'll pick up what we already have in our own system of curated data. And so it'll be a special flag that'll say, hey, check in with the IP team on this. It wouldn't be enter source code. It'll be hopefully a different messaging that'll say, you need to check in with the IP team. So, and as I said to your question earlier, right, we do expect the projects to continue to have the responsibility to understand what licensing is compatible and not. Now, if you find yourself in a situation where it's a license and you've looked at the whitelist we're providing and go, well, it's not here, it doesn't necessarily mean you can't have it. It just means that we have to go into potentially getting board approval for it and then working it into our system. So in that case, we would want to, again, we would want to see Q raised because we need to kind of have the formal request so that we can do everything we need to do to get that into the system. How's my time? 10? Again, so really from a committer's perspective, no piggyback CQs, no reuse CQs. It's gone. No CQ before adding something to Orbit. It's gone. No CQ before you start leveraging a certain third-party. Yay? Come on! Like yay? Come on! And then we will. So we understand this is a lot to ask, right? We understand we're passing a certain amount of responsibility off to you. We will ride this through with you. We will periodically make sure we check in on projects to see what their health is looking like, right? Are you understanding what you should be doing? How often are you doing it? Do you need any special guidance? Do you need any special attention? So we realize certain projects are going to be able to get this happening really, really fast and know what the expectations are, and then maybe some new projects would maybe stumble a little bit, and we're going to be there to help you. The current practice for tracking dependencies, and yes, this is something that we do need to know about for a variety of reasons. Today, the system is an IP log is required before you request your release review. That information is generated by the ticket you have already filed. We get that generated. You approach us. The review happens. Then you get approval, hopefully, as long as we don't find something in the bill that you didn't declare, and you're off to the races for a project release. So the new approach is simply going to use the data from your tooling to produce your software bill of materials. It will again be generated just like the IP log generated from IPzilla. It's going to come from this bill of materials. You ask for your review, you gain your approval, and project release. So really from the practice of how does this differ from today, we're expecting very little notice of difference from a project's perspective. So next steps, we actually have a prototype in development right now. We're doing some testing with it. We have a handful of projects, several actually, who are in some kind of experimental drive, not necessarily with the tooling that we have as prototype, but with we've engaged with them to let them know how to use other tooling, and that's happening right now. Everything seems to be going really well. So they're checking their own licensing at this moment, and everything seems to be going well. We are intending to roll out this prototype to the projects by the end of the year. We will, at this point, have to use current infrastructure. We know we've got a lot of updates to make to documentation, to the Eclipse Commuter handbook, and so on our front-end systems. Ideally, where we want to go with all of this is get to a complete end-to-end system, right? So you guys, it would just be happening, integrate with the build. It would happen automatically every time you build. If something was wrong, you would get violations, and you would have to look into it and or engage with us. And if you did have to engage with us, the system would actually already send that request through. Hey, project blah has a problem. Gotcha. We will replace IPzilla. That's the idea. It's an old instance of Bugzilla. It doesn't support anything anymore. It's been, you know what, tried and true, right? And then we want to get into some security vulnerabilities eventually, which is something we just haven't been able to do yet. Community engagement, we're going to be looking at a bigger role in the bigger open source compliance movement. We want to leverage clearly defined as part of our new initiative. We want to start donating our curated data, use their curated data, and actually open this up so that there are a lot of hands doing license compliance curations. And so it can all only get better for everybody if we're all working towards the same thing and not keeping this information closed source, right? This is one of the things that, I think we just need to do more of a crowdsourcing around it, which is the whole idea of clearly defined. Recently this week, I just want to give a shout out to Lars. We were introduced to Software 360 and Software 360 Antenna, both Eclipse projects, and they're actually in line with where we want to go. And so we will be looking and potentially working a little closer with Lars on that. And what else? I'm running out of time. So just 5 minutes still left, or am I done? 4 minutes. Okay, some IP best practices, and this is regardless. If you're at Eclipse, you have to do this. If you're not at Eclipse and you're running a GitHub project, please do think about some of these best practices. Use headers in your source code, and I know you don't want to, but please use copyright and license headers. Make sure you include a licensed text file in your repository. Please give people a fighting chance to know what license applies to your content. Include a notice file if you are using third-party content, what the versions, the licenses, any other information necessary to comply with the license terms. Include a contributing file. It doesn't have to be formal, but you really need to put people on notice if they're contributing. And I understand how cloning works and you have to work into that, but really put those who are contributing to your project to understand what the license is. And again, if you can put it in the README and it shows up at the bottom of the GitHub page, that's even better. Yes? So I said if you're not at Eclipse, right? So yes, I would. Yes, of course. But if you're, you know what? This gives us a fighting chance, and then yeah, we can always say, hey. But no, good point, Lars. So again, we're going to trust other sources of license data. We're going to donate our curated license data. We're going to use their created license data and work around crowdsourcing. And we're hoping that this will stop a lot of the duplication behind closed doors and start sharing this information for the better of the open source and community. Here's just some links to some of the open source compliance movements that's been happening, specifications and standards over the last few years. We're really trying to get on some of these more engagement. We've adopted the SPDX license identifier, as Lars pointed out. We are now engaged with clearly defined. There's a CISQ is doing some work as part of OMG, and I believe they're hoping to file an RFC against some tooling for bill of materials out that way. There's something called reuse software. I don't know it, and I'm certainly not giving it a thumbs up or anything, but if you're not at Eclipse, it certainly might be a nice tool to ensure you do have these copyright and license headers in your code. And then OpenChain, it's the Linux Foundation. It's some of you might be familiar with it. It's a quality open program, and you can see if you can meet the compliance movement that they're doing. And again, I probably left out some really good things. This isn't meant to be inclusive. So did I make it in time? 1 minute. We have 1 minute for questions. Yes. Mm-hmm.
So the question would be like how to integrate them into your automated checks. So do you have a tool that you integrate in, or do we have to create the bill of materials on our own?
So is Rust an Eclipse project? No.
Not yet.
Oh, it's a language.
Manager like
NPM. Okay. Yes. Yes. Yes.
I'm not sure like where should I start a Rust project? Where should I hook into your automation there? Do you use the clearly defined tool? So how can I do that?
So we are using the clearly defined tools, and we want to start doing a deeper integration. Well, it's already there, but we're in prototype, right? So I'm probably going to turn the question over to Wayne because it's much more technical than I am, just so you know.
Right now,